In the beginning, all tales and stories belong to Nyame, the sky god. But Kwaku Anansi, the spider, yearned to be the owner of all the stories known in the world, and he went to Nyame and offered to buy them. The sky god said, "I am willing to sell the stories, but the price is high. Many people have come to me offering to buy, but the price was too high for them. Rich and powerful families have not been able to pay. Do you think you can do it?" Anansi replied to the sky god, "I can do it. What is the price?" "My price is 3 things," the sky god said. "I must first have Moboro, the hornets. I must then have Onini, the great python. I must then have Osebo, the leopard. For these things I will sell you the right to tell all stories." Anansi said, "I will bring them." He went home and made his plans. He first cut a gourd from a vine and made a small hole in it. He took a large calabash and filled it with water. He went to the tree where the hornets lived. He poured some of the water over himself so that he was dripping. He threw some water over the hornets so that they too were dripping. Then he put the calabash on his head as though to protect himself from a storm and called out to the hornets, "Are you foolish people? Why do you stay in the rain that is falling?" The hornets answered, "Where shall we go?" "Go here in this dry gourd," Anansi told them. The hornets thanked him and flew into the gourd through the small hole. When the last of them had entered, Anansi plugged the hole with a ball of grass, saying, "Oh yes, but you are really foolish people." He took his gourd full of hornets to Nyame, the sky god. The sky god accepted them. He said, "There are 2 more things." Anansi returned to the forest and cut a long bamboo pole and some strong vines. Then he walked toward the house of Onini, the python, talking to himself. He said, "My wife is stupid. I say he is longer and stronger. My wife says he is shorter and weaker. I give him more respect. She gives him less respect. Is she right or am I right? I am right. He is longer. I am right. He is stronger." When Onini the python heard Anansi talking to himself, he said, "Why are you arguing this way with yourself?" The spider replied, I've had a dispute with my wife. She says you are shorter and weaker than this bamboo pole. I say you are longer and stronger." Onini said, "It's useless and silly to argue when you can find out the truth. Bring the pole and we'll measure." So Anansi laid the pole on the ground, and the python came and stretched himself out beside it. "You seem a little short," Anansi said. The python stretched further. "A little more," Anansi said. "I can stretch no more," Onini said. "When you stretch at one end, you get shorter at the other," Anansi said. "Let me tie you at the front so you won't slip." He tied Onini's head to the pole. Then he went to the other end and tied the tail to the pole. He wrapped the vine all around Onini until the python couldn't move. "Onini," Anansi said, "it turns out that my wife was right and I was wrong. You were shorter than the pole and weaker. My opinion wasn't as good as my wife's, but you were even more foolish than I, and now you're my prisoner." Anansi carried the python to Nyame the sky god, who said, "There is one thing more." Osebo the leopard was next. Anansi went into the forest and dug a deep pit where the leopard was accustomed to walk. He covered it with small branches and leaves and put dust on it, so that it was impossible to tell where the pit was. Anansi went away and hid. When Osebo came prowling in the black of the night, he stepped into the trap Anansi had prepared and fell to the bottom. Anansi heard the sound of the leopard falling, and he said, Osebo, you are half foolish." When morning came, Anansi went to the pit and saw the leopard there. "Osebo," he asked, "what are you doing in this hole?" "I've fallen into a trap," Osebo said. "Help me out." "I would gladly help you," Anansi said, "but I'm sure that if I bring you out, I'll have no thanks for it. You will get hungry, and later on you'll be wanting to eat me and my children." "I swear it won't happen," Osebo said. "Very well. Since you swear it, I will take you out," Anansi said. He bent a tall green tree toward the ground, so that its top was over the pit, and he tied it that way. Then he tied a rope to the top of the tree and dropped the other end of it into the pit. "Tie this to your tail," he said. Osebo tied the rope to his tail. "Is it well tied?" Anansi asked. "Yes, it's well tied," the leopard said. "In that case," Anansi said, "you are not merely half foolish, you are all foolish." And he took his knife and cut the other rope, the one that held the tree bowed to the ground. The tree straightened up with a snap, pulling Osebo out of the hole. He hung in the air head downward, twisting and turning. And while he hung this way, Anansi killed him with his weapons. Then he took the body of the leopard and carried it to Nyame, the sky god, saying, "Here is the third thing. Now I have paid the price." Nyame said to him, "Kwaku Anansi, great warriors and chiefs have tried, but they have been unable to do it. You have done it. Therefore I will give you the stories. From this day onward, all stories belong to you. Whenever a man tells a story, he must acknowledge that it's Anansi's tale." In this way, Anansi the spider became the owner of all stories that are told. To Anansi, all stories belong. It was a time of famine, and Kwaku Anansi was wondering how he'd be able to fill his storehouse with food. He heard from his son Intikuma that Abosom the lizard had a fine garden, so he went to see for himself. As Intikuma had described it, so it was. The lizard's garden was green and flourishing. Anansi said to himself, "If I had this garden, I'd have no more worries." So he went home and planned how to get it from the lizard. One night, when Abosom's crop was ready for harvesting, Anansi collected all his children together, saying, "Follow me and do whatever I do." He walked from the doorway of his house to the lizard's garden, the children walking behind him. Then he turned and walked back to his doorway. He walked back to the lizard's place. Then he walked back to his house. The children began to complain, asking whether Anansi couldn't make up his mind. But he said angrily, "Don't question your elders. Follow me and do as I do." Back and forth they went. All night they marched. When the sun began to return and things became visible, they saw that where they had been marching there was now a trail, where formerly there had been only tall grass. Then Anansi gave his children baskets and digging knives, and they began to dig up the yams and harvest the other crops on the lizard's land. When Lizard came, he saw Anansi's family taking all his crops, and he cried out, "What are you doing here on my land?" Anansi replied, "Your land? It is my land. And why do you stand there in my garden without asking my permission?" They argued this way for a long while, until the lizard said, "We shall go to the chief of the district and ask for a judgment." They went to the chief and presented their cases. First Anansi said, "It's my land." Then Abosom said, "It's my land." And each one of them gave his reasons. The chief listened. At last he went to the garden to see for himself. He said to Abosom, "Where is your house?" The lizard showed him his house. The chief then asked him, "Where is the path from your house?" The lizard was surprised at such a question. He answered, "There is no path. Among my people, when we go from one place to another, we rarely go twice the same way. Sometimes we go on top of the grass, sometimes we go between the grass, sometimes we jump from tree to tree." When the chief heard this, he shook his head. "This is unheard of," he said. "Whenever someone goes from somewhere that is his to something that is his, he makes a path." Then the chief turned to Anansi, asking, "Where is your path?" And Anansi showed him. "This is my judgment," the chief declared. "As Anansi has a path from his house to the garden is his." When the lizard heard this, he lost the power of words. He couldn't say anything because the judgment had been so false. He simply moved his head up and down without making a sound, calling on the sky god Nyame to witness his misfortune. The chief went home and the lizard went home. As for Anansi, he and his children carried away all the food and put it in their storehouse. But the lizard made a plan. First he dug a deep hole far into the ground. Then he plastered mud around the top to make the hole look small. When he was through, the opening was no bigger than a man's hand. The lizard made another thing. He made a cape of flies. He sat before his house catching the blue and green flies that alighted, and with fine threads he wove them into a beautiful cloth. When it was finished, the cape was like nothing that had ever been seen in the country. Whenever the cape was moved a little, the flies buzzed and made a lovely musical sound. Abosom put the cape on and went through the marketplace of the village. Everyone who saw the cape and heard it buzz wanted to buy it. But the lizard said, "This is all that I have left. My crops and my farm are gone. This is all I own. Why should I sell it?" They offered him many things in exchange, but he refused. Word came to Anansi about the cape, and he went to the marketplace to see it. He said to himself, "I will buy this cape. Such elegance is only for me." That night he went to Lizard's house, saying, "How much will you take for your cloth of flies?" Abosom replied, "Since you have outwitted me and taken all my food, I am hungry. I will give you the cape if you will fill up the small hole in my yard with yams and okra." Anansi went and looked at the hole. He said to himself, "The lizard is sillier than I imagined. I'll give him back a few of his yams and get the cape." Then he said to Abosom, "It is a bargain. I will fill the hole, and you will give me the cloth of flies." They called on the chief to be a witness to the deal. Then Anansi went home for the food. He brought a small basket of yams and okra. He put the yams and okra into the hole, but it wasn't yet full. He went home for another basket, but when he emptied it, the hole still wasn't full. Many baskets were brought. Anansi's children were called upon to help. They carried the baskets full to the lizard's place, and they carried them back empty. Everything they brought went into the hole without filling it. They worked and carried all night. When morning came, the hole still wasn't full. Finally, Anansi brought the last of the yams and okra and put them in the hole the lizard had made, and he cried out, "I have given everything. I have no more." The lizard looked into the hole, saying, "You haven't even begun to fill it." But Anansi complained, "I have nothing more. My house is empty." "The chief is our witness," the lizard said. "You promised to fill the hole. You haven't kept the bargain." Anansi groaned in misery. But the lizard said, "I will discharge the debt if you return my garden to me." Anansi cried, "It is yours! It's yours!" "It has been witnessed," Abosom said. "The land is mine. Here is the cloak." The lizard took the cloak and put it forward for Anansi. Anansi took it and put it over his shoulders and was very proud. But just at that moment, a strong wind came, and the flies buzzed. And before Anansi knew what was happening, the cloak of flies flew away. Anansi ran after it through the bush country, but it was useless. This is the way Abosom the lizard got back his garden and his crops. Ever since then, Anansi has been trying to make a cloak of flies like the one Lizard made. He spins his cloth and catches flies in it. For a while they buzz, but then Anansi gets hungry and eats them one at a time. And never has he been able to complete the cloak he is trying to make. As for the Lizard, whenever he remembers the false judgment of the chief that gave his farm to Anansi, he moves his head up and down helplessly, calling on the sky god to take note of this miscarriage of justice. It happened one time that the animals of the fields and the forest had a great argument about which of them was the oldest and entitled to the most respect. Each of them said, "I am the oldest." They argued at great length, and at last they decided to take the case before a judge. They went to the house of Anansi the spider, and they said to him, "Kwaku Anansi, we're in dispute as to which of us is the most venerable. Listen to our testimony." So Anansi called his children to bring him a cashew shell, and he sat on it with great dignity, as though he were a chief sitting on a carved stool. The guinea fowl was the first to speak. He said, "I swear it, I am the oldest of all creatures. When I was born, there was a great grass fire. Since there was no one else in the world to put it out, I ran into the flames and stamped them out with my feet. My legs were badly burned, as you can see, and they are still red." The animals looked at the guinea fowl's legs and saw it was true. They were red. They said, "Ee, he is old." Then the parrot declared, "I swear it. When I came into the world, there were no tools and no weapons. It was I who made the first hammer that was ever used by blacksmiths. I beat the iron into shape with my beak, and it's for this reason that my beak is bent." The animals looked at the parrot's beak, crying out, "Ee! The parrot is old indeed." Then the elephant spoke. "I swear it. I am older than the parrot and the guinea fowl. When I was created, the sky god gave me a long and useful nose. When the other animals were made, there was a shortage of material, and they were given small noses." The animals examined the elephant's nose and shouted, "Ee! The elephant is truly old." The rabbit gave his testimony then, saying, "I swear it. I am the oldest. When I came into the world, night and day had not yet been created." The animals applauded the rabbit. They said, "Ee! Is he not really the oldest?" The porcupine spoke last, and he said, "I swear it. As you will all have to admit, I am the oldest. When I was born, the earth wasn't finished yet. It was soft like butter and couldn't be walked upon." This was great testimony, and the animals cheered the porcupine. They cried, "Ee! Who can be older than he?" Then they waited to hear Anansi's judgment. He sat on his cashew shell and shook his head, saying, "If you had come to me first, I would have saved you this argument, for I am the oldest of all creatures. When I was born, the earth itself had not yet been made, and there was nothing to stand on. When my father died, there was no ground to bury him in, so I had to bury him in my head." And when the animals heard this, they declared, "Ee! Kwaku Anansi is the oldest of all living things. How can we doubt it?" It is said that once in the old days, the frog was jeered at by other animals of the forest because he had no tail. He was deeply embarrassed, and he went to Nyame the sky god to see if a tail could be given to him. The sky god listened to the frog's complaint, and after considering the problem, he said, "I have a special well which never goes dry. I need a caretaker for this well. If you will agree to be my caretaker, I will give you a tail." The frog said to Nyame, "I will be caretaker. Give me the tail." Nyame gave the frog a tail and sent him to the well, saying, "You are in charge. Keep my well clean, so that anyone who is thirsty will always be able to drink." The frog went to the well and lived in it. His tail made him proud. It made him conceited. Then one year there was a drought in the land. The rain didn't fall. The springs dried up. Only in Nyame's well was there water, and this made the frog foolish and unbearable. When there wasn't any water anywhere else, the animals went to Nyame and asked for something to drink. He told them to go to his well. First the buffalo went to drink, and hearing him come, the frog sang out, "Who comes to muddy Nyame's well?" The buffalo replied, "It is I." The frog said, "Go away. There's no water here. The well is dry." The buffalo went away and was thirsty. Then the sheep went to the well to drink. Hearing him approach, the frog sang out, "Who comes to muddy Nyame's well?" The sheep replied, "It is I." And the frog said to him, "Go away. There's no water here. The well is dry." So the sheep went away and was thirsty. Many animals came in turn, the gazelle, the wild pig, the cow, the elephant, and all the others. And to each of them the frog gave the same answer, "Go away. There's no water here. The well is dry." At last there was widespread misery in the country, and when the news came to Nyame that the animals had nothing to drink, he himself went to his well to see what was the matter. The frog heard him coming, and he called out, "Who comes to muddy Nyame's well?" Nyame replied sternly, "It is I." And the frog answered, as was his habit, "Go away, there's no water here. The well is dry." When the sky god heard this, he was angered. He came and took away the frog's tail and drove him out. So it is now, as it has been ever since that day, that the frog has no tail. He goes wherever he can find water and lives there, remembering the days of his glory when he was the sky god's watchman. But Nyame never lets the frog forget that he caused misery in the land. When frogs are first born, they all have tails, but before they are grown, the sky god takes their tails away. In the beginning there was only one hoe in the world, and men worked their fields with a bush knife. For the coming of the hoe to Ashanti, Kotoko the porcupine is responsible, and Anansi the spider also played his part. It is said that Kotoko and Anansi joined together to begin a new farm. When it was Anansi's turn to work, he took his family and went into the field and dug the earth with his bush knife. And when it was Kotoko's turn, he came to the field with a hoe. He raised his hoe and struck it on the earth, singing, "Give me a hand, hoe of Kotoko, give me a hand. It is hot in the sun." The hoe leaped from Kotoko's hands and began to work in the field by itself. It cut up the earth over a great distance, and when night came, the porcupine said other words, and the hoe came to rest. When he went home, Kotoko took the hoe and hid it in his house. But Kwaku Anansi, when he saw how the hoe labored, said, "Why do I break my back? I shall get this hoe and let it work for me." So early in the day, before the light came, Anansi went to Kotoko's house and stole the hoe from where it was hidden. He took it out to the field. He struck it on the earth and sang, "Give me a hand, hoe of Kotoko, it is hot in the sun." The hoe began to work. It turned and cultivated the earth while Anansi sat in the shade and rested. Anansi said, "Who ever had a thing like this before?" The hoe moved across the field. All the earth was newly turned. Anansi was satisfied. He said to the hoe, "Stop now, the field is done." But the hoe didn't stop, because Anansi didn't know the right word. It went right on hoeing. It hoed itself into the dense brush, and still Anansi couldn't stop it. It hoed itself to the edge of the sea, and still it wouldn't stop. It went across the sea and came to the country of the white people. And there the people liked it and fashioned other hoes after it. And when they had made many, they brought some of them across the sea to the Ashanti people. Thus today among the Ashanti there are many, many of these hoes, and men use them instead of the bush knife when they have to till the earth. Kwaku Anansi's thin belly came from greed. It is said that one year there was a wedding feast in the town of Kibis, and another wedding feast in the town of Diaby, and they were both on the same day. Anansi asked himself, "Which feast will I go to?" He thought, and then he said, "I am very hungry. I will go to both. I will eat first at the place where the food is served first, and afterward I'll go to the other place and eat again." But Anansi couldn't find out which of the feasts would come first. He went to Diaby and asked, "When will the food be served?" But they couldn't tell him. So he went then to the town of Kibis and asked, "What time will the food be given out?" But they didn't know. He went back and forth between the two towns, first the one and then the other, until he was weary. But still he knew nothing about where the food would be given out first. So Kwaku Anansi bought 2 long ropes, and he sent for his sons Intikuma and Kwekutsin. He tied both ropes around his middle. He gave the end of one rope to Intikuma, saying, "Take this end of the rope with you and go to Diaby. When they start giving out the food, pull hard on the rope, and I will come." He gave the end of the other rope to Kwekutsin, saying, "Take this with you to Kibis. When the feast begins, pull hard, and I will come. This way I will know where the food is given out first." So Intikuma went to Diaby, taking the end of one rope with him, and Kwekutsin went to Kibis, taking the end of the other rope with him. Each of them stood in the town and waited to give the signal. But when the feasts began in Diaby and Kibis, they began at the very same moment. Intikuma pulled and Kwekutsin pulled. As they both pulled very hard, Anansi couldn't go one way or another. He was halfway between, and he couldn't move. His sons pulled harder and harder, and they didn't stop until the feasts were ended and the food was gone. Then they went to see what had detained their father. They found him where they had left him, but he didn't look the same. Where the ropes had squeezed him around the middle, he had become very small. In this way he has always remained. The spider carries with him forever the mark of his greed.